Hey, Scott Jordan here for Jancast number 196 for Thursday, October 14th, 2025. And this is a pretty interesting show we're going to talk about today. We're going to go back in history a little bit. For those of you that weren't around or maybe were not familiar, but in the last couple of days, we just got an announcement that Brady Plus and Imperial Dade are merging. And that's going to be an interesting situation going forward. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. But do you know this has happened before? Back in the 90s, those of you that have been around for a while, back in the 90s, there was a roll-up started by a company called Amsan, or American Sanitary Inc. They started out in 1987 or so, ended up acquiring about 44, 45 individual distributor locations and growing that business to roughly $300 million in sales. Eventually, that became part of Interline Brands and then later integrated into Supply Works and then Home Depot Pro. So we kind of, if you look into it now, you kind of know where things went. But at the time, it was like, wow, what's happening, right? And then the other big one was back in the same time period, a little bit later, about 10 years later, was Unisource Worldwide. Now, Unisource headquarters was actually pretty close to us in Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, which is maybe 20 minutes away from the Bullen location. And we did business with them as well as other manufacturers. So that was founded in 1996. Now, they had the advantage of starting off. They already had the Alco Standard Corporation, which was already in place with locations across the United States. So they started off faster than Amsan, where Amsan kind of had to go out and create the network that they ended up creating. Unisource started out with a pretty good network already. It ended up being acquired in 1999 by Georgia Pacific. But interesting enough, in 2002, Bain Capital purchased a 60% stake of that program. And I'll talk about it in a little bit, but Bain Capital is involved with the recent merger situation. So the interesting thing about all this is, back then, the goal was to roll up as many distributorships as possible and have a nationwide network to supply into the Jansan industry. Sounds like a good idea, and I guess it was for a while. It ended up that most of these things didn't end up working out. I talked about the Amsan one, the Unisource. It kind of ended up falling apart to a certain degree. At the peak, they both had a similar number of employees. I think the Unisource one ended up with about 85 distribution centers. So very similar to what's going on today. We've been watching this for a while, where Imperial Dade was kind of in the lead for a little bit there, I thought, in my opinion. I'm not a financial expert or anything like that, but it looked to me like they were kind of in the lead. Brady Plus kind of came at it from the West Coast, where Imperial Dade was focused more on the East Coast, and they're kind of meeting in the middle, so to speak, and not exactly sure what was going to happen. So the interesting thing is about the numbers. So Brady Plus, now these are, give credit where credit is due. Most of this info came from Perplexity, which is one of my AI preferred sources because it gives you links and everything else. So Brady Plus rough sales are around $5 billion. That came from Forbes. Roughly the same amount of employees as Imperial Dade. Brady Plus has around 6,000 employees. And again, more West Coast oriented than East Coast. Imperial Dade, it's said, is credited with about a $1.6 billion in sales, 7,500 employees, and about 130 locations. So the number of locations is a little bit higher for the Imperial Dade, but the sales dollars were much, much, much higher with the Brady Plus thing. So what does this all mean? First, I wanted to make sure you had the information if you didn't hear about it, because it's certainly an interesting subject and topic of discussion right now on what's going to happen. So back in the day when the Amsan and Unisource did all this, a bunch of people were able to cash out, which was great, depending upon, how long you'd been in the business and everything else. But cashing out's one thing, but the plan was to end up with this huge network. It ended up kind of falling apart, and what ended up happening back then was a whole bunch of the key players that got acquired, either the sales force or other parts of the businesses that got acquired, ended up splitting off and starting their own distributorships, which kind of restarted the whole system of having independence versus a big national account situation. So the question is that going to happen now? Full transparency, Bullen does business with both Brady Plus as well as Imperial Dade. So we do have something in the game, not quite as much as other people, and we obviously do a lot of business with regular distributors. So the question is this going to be kind of like back in the day where all those people that got acquired ended up starting up new businesses, or what? I guess time will tell whether or not this is going to be from a financial standpoint. Again, Bain Capital is also involved in the Brady Plus one. So 20 years later, the same venture capital firms are kind of in the same business. So it's good to know that Bain Capital is firmly in place with the Jansan industry. So anxious to hear what you think about the whole thing, but I thought it'd be good to get out this Jancast and kind of bring everybody up to date as to what's happening, what happened back in the day, and what's happening right now, because things are changing and pretty rapidly. So we'll see how this plays out. It does look like there's not one of the two is coming out on top. They stress that it's a merger, even though from a sales standpoint, I would think Brady Plus would have some advantage just based on the dollars. But that's me kind of looking at the tea leaves saying I'm not exactly sure what's going on, but we'll see how it plays out in the future, and hope this has been beneficial and bringing you up to speed on what's going on in the industry. Thanks a lot for tuning in.